So today we take up for discussion a very interesting essay by Siddharth Pico Iyer titled In Praise of the Humble Comma. In Praise of the Humble Comma. Siddharth Pico Iyer is a journalist, essayist, a travel writer, and a novelist. His first work is entitled Video Night in Kathmandu and Other Reports from the Not So Far East shot him into fame. He became famous with the publication of that book. It's a long title, Video Night in Kathmandu and Other Reports from the Not So Far East. It is with the publication of this book that he became famous. As you know, if you look at his name, Siddharth Pico Iyer. Well, Raghavan Iyer, these are two Malayalam names, Raghavan, then Iyer. Well, Siddharth, as you would know, it comes from the name of Buddha, and Pico comes from the name of a famous Italian Renaissance humanist, Pico della Mirandola. Pico della Mirandola. So Pico comes from that. So it's a combination of Buddha's name and that Pico della Mirandola's name. So Siddharth Pico Iyer. His father, Pico Iyer's father, was an Oxford philosopher and a political theorist. And his mother, Nandini Nanak Mehta, was a religious scholar. So he hails from such an educated family, and he was also educated at the prestigious Oxford and Harvard universities. Well, this is an introduction about the author Siddharth Pico Iyer. Now, concerning the essay, the interesting short essay in praise of the humble comma that he has penned, well, it's an interesting poetic account. It's an interesting account of the need for proper punctuation, the importance of punctuation in writing. That is the theme, the basic theme. Well, besides the grammatical function, the essay brings out the emotional and the psychological need for proper punctuation. Now, why should we need punctuation? Because we use punctuation in writing, in written language. Now, language is, basically, it is the spoken language. That is language that is used to communicate through word of mouth, by speaking. Now, how can we express everything that we intend? How can we express our mind? How can we put our mind onto a piece of paper? Now, this is the problem. To express the various emotions and the psychological, feelings, the state of mind, and all those things. How can we express everything into written language? How can we translate our mind onto a piece of paper? This is a question for which, well, we need punctuation. Without punctuation, it is not possible. Now, this is the theme. In a very comic vein, he compares the comma to God. He compares, comma is like God. God who has given human beings breath. And it is the same God who takes away the breath, who gives breath and takes breath. Both give you breath. The essay illustrates how meaning is enriched how meaning becomes, more fruitful, how meaning is altered, changed, or even sometimes the meaning is subverted by the humble comma. It can work miracles. A comma, a punctuation mark can work miracles in written language. Well, this is the theme of the essay. Now, concerning the summary, here's a very, very brief summary. I have divided it into two sections. Section number 1. Now, this is the first half. In the first half, Pico Iyer says punctuation marks are like the road signs. Punctuation marks are compared to road signs. While traveling along the road, we can see road signs as well as signals, light signals, road light signals, road signs. Now, punctuation marks are the road signs placed along the highway of our communication. They control, the road signs control speed, they give directions and also prevent sometimes, head-on collisions. Road signs are very, very helpful. It gives the necessary warning to the drivers. A period, for example, a period, we usually call it full stop. That's a period. A period has the unblinking finality of a red light. If you happen to see, while traveling along the road, if you happen to see a red light, well, the vehicle, the car or the bus, the train, it comes to a stop. That is a red light. So a period, there's a full stop. It has the unblinking finality of a red light. Well, the sentence comes to a stop. The sentence ends there. The comma is a flashing yellow light. It is like the comma is compared to a yellow light. The yellow light that asks us only to slow down, to reduce the speed. And the semicolon is a stop sign that tells us to ease gradually to a halt. Semicolon. It's a semicolon, a semi-stop. To come to a halt, to come to pause, to come to a halt gradually, slow down. Now, punctuation marks is a civic prop. It's a civic property. It is a civic prop. It's like a pillar that holds society upright. It is like a pillar that supports the society. Punctuation is, of course, the signature of cultures. It is something very important. It tells us a lot about the culture of the people, the culture of the nation where that language is spoken. It scores music in our minds. Well, it gives the notations, the musical notations, gets our thought moving to the rhythm of our hearts. As I said at the beginning, to translate our mind, these punctuation marks helps us to translate our mind onto the paper. Now, punctuation adjusts the tone, the color, the volume till the feeling comes into perfect focus. Well, this is the only way. That is, by using the punctuation marks, this is the only way that we can translate our feelings, our mind onto a piece of paper. Section number 2, the second section. Punctuation gives the human voice and all the meanings that lie between the words. Popping in a comma can be like slipping. If you putting a comma is like slipping on the necklace. Like a beautifully dressed woman, a beautifully dressed girl is, the language, a sentence or a text is compared to a beautifully dressed girl. Putting punctuation marks is like, slipping on, like putting on a necklace, slipping on a necklace, or like catching the sound of running water that complements the silence of a Japanese landscape. In a Japanese landscape, when it is completely silent, and it is like adding the sound of the running water, the rippling water. It is like that, like putting a comma. Words cannot bend and curve. It is very difficult. Words are like, straight jackets, like a stick, like a piece of iron. Well, it cannot bend and curve. Whereas By using punctuation marks, a comma, well, it can make the gentle drift of the mind in thought, the movement of the mind, the movement of the thoughts in the mind. Well, that can be added only with the help of a comma, turning in on it and back on itself, reverse, you can go back, redoubling, you can add extra stress, and returning along the course of its own sweet river music. The semicolon brings clauses and thoughts together with the silent discretion of a hostess. Just like, a hostess arranging guests around a table, a semicolon does the function of a hostess. And punctuation, in fact, it is a labor of love. It is a labor of love. It brings us back to God's. This is what he says. This is about the essay. Now look at the questions. Short answer questions. Question number 1. Why is the comma described as humble? A humble comma. This is the title, humble comma. So why is the comma described as humble? Although it is small and often disregarded, sometimes you don't care about it. It is often disregarded. It is not given. Usually, people who writers, they don't attach much importance to a comma. Although it is small and often disregarded, the comma performs miracles in writing. The comma does give breath and it takes it away, like God. Pico Iyer compares comma to God. It gives breath and it takes away the breath, just as it is said about God. Now, without comma, everything would be language. The words would be a complete chaos, a complete disorder. Why is the comma compared to breath? Why is it compared to breath? For example, language. When we speak, for example, there are pauses. After every meaning, there's a short gap, a short stop. Now that gap, the thinking time, is given by comma in a written language. Comma is like breath given by God's, because it gives the mind a temporary stop, a pause to think. If it is taken out, if a comma is taken out of the language, then the mind is deprived of a resting place, but it loses. The text loses a resting place. Now, actually, a comma gives a resting place in the language, a resting place for the mind. Now, why do lovers defy the use of comma? Lovers, they don't like a comma, because a comma separates, comma gives gap, comma separates. Lovers don't like to separate themselves. They don't like. They consider themselves as inseparables. Now, since the comma, the role of the comma is to separate inseparables, they don't like it. That's the answer. By establishing the relations between words, punctuation establishes the relation between people and between the people using words. A comma, this is the function of a comma. A comma separates the inseparables. Its role is to separate the different parts of a sentence, to give the resting place. Now, this may be the reason why lovers defy it. Lovers don't like it, because it separates, comma, separates the inseparables. Explain the analogy of a run-on sentence to a sink piled high with the dirty dishes. A run-on sentence, a sentence after sentence without a full stop, without punctuation marks. You go on writing without any punctuation marks. That's a run-on sentence. Now, Pico Iyer compares a run-on sentence, sentence after sentence without comma and full stop. A run-on sentence is compared to a sink, a kitchen sink. A kitchen sink filled with dirty dishes. After a dinner is over, after a meal is over, you put all the dirty plates into a kitchen sink. Now, a run-on sentence is like that. Why? Can you explain the analogy, the similarity, the comparison? Punctuation is a civic prop, a pillar. A punctuation mark is a pillar that holds society upright. A run-on sentence is as unsightly. It is a very, very dirty sight. As unsightly as a sink, a kitchen sink, piled, piled high with what? Dirty dishes. Because, it's a dirty sight. It's a very ugly sight. It is not a good sight. Because a sink, filled with dirty plates, it's not a good sight. So a run-on sentence is like that. The phrases, in a run-on sentence, the parts of a sentence, the phrases and the clauses are piled. They are piled up without division. There is no division. Question number 5. How does the comma add subtlety to Naipaul's description? Naipaul, the famous Indian English writer, Naipaul. He was a middle-aged man, comma, with glasses. Look at that expression. He was a middle-aged man, comma, with glasses. Now, what is the importance of that comma? This is the question. Now, if you remove the comma after man, well, you may not like it. A middle-aged man with glasses means, he had problems with his eyes. He has problems with his eyesight, so he has become an old man. That is the connotation. A middle-aged man with glasses. Well, a middle-aged man with glasses. That is something, an addition. It is not something, it is not the first meaning. That is it. So you put a comma, the meaning completely changes. V.S. Naipaul, in his latest novel, writes, he was a middle-aged man with glasses. The first comma can seem a little precious. You put a comma, it makes a lot of difference. It gives the description a spin as well as subtlety, and it shows that the glasses are not part of the middle-agedness. It is not because of his age that he wears glasses, but something else. So with glasses, that is something else. So it, you may like it with a comma, but without a comma, you may not like it because it is part of you have become an aged man. You have started losing the eyesight. That is the meaning. Now, last question, the last short answer question. Why does Iyer argue that the punctuation marks are the road signs placed along the highway of our communication? Because the road signs, they have a lot of functions. The control speeds, provide directions, prevent head-on collisions, and the punctuation marks, the role of the punctuation marks in a language is like that. Why does Iyer argue that the punctuation marks are the road signs? Punctuation marks are the road signs placed on the highway of our communication to control speeds, to provide directions, to prevent head-on collisions. A period, period means a full stop, has the unblinking finality of a red light. You put a full stop after every sentence, so that's a stop. The comma is a flashing yellow light that asks us only to slow down. A comma tells us to slow down. And the semicolon is a stop sign. A semicolon is a temporary stop that tells us to ease gradually, to come to a halt, slowly come to a halt before starting up again. So these are the short answer questions. Now we come to the paragraph questions. What are the benefits of proper punctuation? Iyer says that the punctuations give words a significant difference. Punctuation makes a lot of difference to a written language. Punctuation gives us human voice and all the meaning that lie between the words. It expresses, it translates our mind. He explains that often when speaking, while we speak, you need hesitation to gather thoughts. Sometimes we stop. To gather thoughts, to think, we need time, the thinking time. Instead of mumbling, instead of speaking indistinctly, not clearly, commas are used. Now, instead of mumbling, commas are used instead of mumbling. If a comma is not properly utilized, then the communication might become misinterpreted and difficult to understand. Sometimes if you forget to put a comma, well, the meaning completely changes. When the punctuation is used correctly in literature, it often facilitates the reader's perspective. It translates the exact ideas, as it is intended, as it came, on a character's mood. The punctuation gives the characters a human voice, a tone, and often unique, something special, because language, is something very, very personal. Every person has a way of speaking, a style of language. So that style can be translated into a piece of paper, into written language with the help of these commas. Now, what effect did the offbeat punctuation have in the works of modernist writers? He talks about the modernist writers. Modernist writers had a special type of using, a special way of using punctuation marks. Writers, almost all the writers, they perfectly obey all the rules of grammar, and they apply the rules of grammar to their work because they care about the audience. They care about the readers. They are very particular that the readers should get the idea that I have in my mind. They should not misunderstand me. So they are the writers are very careful. It is a very, very tedious work for them. It is not not something pleasant. It is not something interesting. It's a very difficult task. But they do it. Why? Because they love their readers. They love their readers to understand them clearly, perfectly. They want them to understand the work in its fullest. The comma is more than a punctuation mark. It is the giver of birth, and it gives the birth and it takes birth, a connection between the author and the audience. Punctuation was one of the first proprieties of the Victorian age. Well, the Victorian people, they were very, very particular about the use of punctuation marks. But because it was the age of the corset, the tightly fitting, dress, the tightly fitting dress, the modernists threw off. The modernist writers, they didn't care about the punctuation marks. James Joyce, for example, James Joyce, the famous, the author of Ulysses, he wrote almost 36 pages of language without comma, without any punctuation mark. 36 pages of a novel. While E. Cummings converted God to God. Usually we ask people to capitalize G when you write God, to give respect to the divinity. We usually write God with a capital G, but E. Cummings, he converted the G, the G of God to lowercase, not uppercase, that is small letter. Cummings wanted people to write God without giving that the so-called respect to the divinity, with a small letter, with a lowercase g. Now punctuation, next question. Punctuation becomes the signature of cultures. How is it that the punctuation marks become the signature of cultures? He talks about, especially in the Spanish people, the Chinese people, and the communists. Now, the punctuation is a civic prop. As we said earlier, it's a pillar. Punctuation mark is a pillar that supports the society, that holds society upright. Punctuation was one of the first proprieties of the Victorian age. They were very particular about the Victorian writers. They were very particular about the punctuation marks. But the modernist writers, they didn't care. They threw off. The hot-blooded Spaniard, the Spanish people, the people of Spain, they used double exclamation and double question marks. Well, exclamation marks we use only one exclamation mark and one question mark. But they used the double exclamation marks and double question marks to show what? Because they were very hot-blooded people, to show their passion, to show their urgency. Now, as far as the Chinese people are concerned, they omitted directions because their language is a special type of pictorial writings, ideograms. Now, so they omitted the directions to make it more difficult to understand, to make it inscrutable, he says, to make it more difficult to understand. Now, the anarchy and the commotion of the 60s were given voice in the exploding exclamation marks, and the writers, the 60s, the people started using, capital letters and the other exclamation marks, indiscriminately in the 60s. In communist societies where they don't believe in God, because in usual conventional societies we capitalize God. For the communists, they don't believe in God, so they capitalize ministries, subcommittees, secretariat, government put capital instead of God, because they don't believe in God. In communist societies where the state is absolute, not God, state is the most important thing. So the dignity and divinity of the capital letters is reserved for not God, but ministries, M capital, subcommittee, S C capital, secretariat, S capital. Punctuation thus becomes the signature of cultures. Now, question number 4. How does punctuation expose the meaning between words? How does punctuation marks translate, our intentions, our ideas, our thoughts? Punctuation adjusts the tone and volume, the tone, color, and volume till the feeling comes into perfect focus. It scores the music in our minds, and it gets our thoughts moving to the rhythm of our hearts. The rhythm of the hearts, the music in the heart, is translated onto a piece of paper with the help of punctuation marks. Punctuation acknowledges that the meaning of the discourse lies not in the units but in the pauses. You can go on writing, you can go on putting your ideas into words, but without the punctuation marks, it will be nothing. In short, punctuation gives us the human voice and all the meaning that lies between the words. For example, you are young, are you? Now, if you take away the final question mark, well, it loses its incident. It's a beautiful. You are young, are you? Now, that final question mark, if you don't put it, it loses, its innocence. Now, don't do that. Don't do that. If you take away the apostrophe, you do like this. Do not do that. Oh, that's very threatening. Don't do that. That's something, something very quiet, something not so threatening. It's something ordinary. Don't do that. It's a piece of advice. But do not do that. That sounds very, very threatening. So every child is aware of. So look at the importance of an apostrophe, a punctuation mark. So don't do that. An ordinary don't do that becomes a threatening. Do not do that. Look, it becomes a threatening command. Do not. But don't do that is quite normal, ordinary. Every child knows the menace, the threat of a dropped apostrophe. Don't do that. Every believer, every person who believes in God knows the shame of having faith reduced to faith. If you put faith in inverted commas, well, it becomes something very, very, it loses its faith. It is something questionable. It is something different. No, faith, the so-called faith, it is not faith. Faith, if you put in inverted commas, well, it becomes, it is a faith that is questioned. Now these are the paragraph questions. Now here is an essay in 5 paragraphs. Well, put all these ideas into 5 paragraphs. First paragraph is an introduction, and the last paragraph, 5th paragraph, is a conclusion. And look at the 5 paragraphs of the essay. The question is, punctuation conveys the subtleties and the nuances, the small, slight meanings that are otherwise lost on readers. Discussed with reference to Pico Iyer's In Praise of Humble Comma. Siddhartha Pico Raghavan Iyer, that's the full name. Siddhartha from Buddha, Pico from the Renaissance Italian writer Raghavan Iyer, that's his full name, known as Pico Iyer, is a journalist, essayist, a travel writer, and a novelist. In Praise of the Humble Comma is an interesting account of the need for proper punctuation. That's the introduction. Iyer compares the comma to the gods. He says that both, that is the comma as well as the god, can give breath and take it away. God gives breath, God gives life. And it's the same God who takes it away. Similarly, comma gives the resting place to our mind. Commas represent the human emotion, the quick breath before a long sentence or a short pause needed for emphasis. Without the comma, complex sentences would be very hard to interpret. Now, without the comma, it is very difficult to interpret the language. English would be a very long line of run-on sentences without comma. You may not be able to understand the ideas contained in such a language without punctuation marks. So it may be said that the comma is what holds the written language together. That is the importance of comma. Punctuation is a civic property. It holds the society upright. It supports the society. It keeps the society upright, balanced. Punctuation was one of the first properties of the Victorian age. They attached, the writers of the Victorian age, they attached a lot of importance to punctuation marks. But the modern writers, they threw it off. The hot-blooded Spaniards, they use double exclamation points and double question marks to show their passion and urgency. The Chinese, they omitted the directions from the ideograms, and that omission of the ideogram, the omission of the direction from the ideogram made it very difficult for people to understand the Chinese language. The anarchy and commotion of the 60s, the writers of the 1960s, they used capital letters and the punctuation marks indiscriminately in the exploding exclamation marks. The writers' capital. Communists, they capitalized not gods because they don't believe in gods. So they started capitalizing the names of ministries, subcommittees, secretariats, and punctuation thus becomes what? The signature of the cultures. Now, the music of the mind. The music of the mind can be translated onto paper with the help of punctuation marks. This is what is given in the 4th paragraph. Punctuation adjusts the tone and color and volume till the feeling of the mind comes into perfect focus. It scores the focus in our minds. It scores, the musical, the notations. It scores. The notations are marked on the paper. The notations of the music of the mind, our music, is translated into paper with the help of the punctuation marks. Get our thoughts moving to the rhythm of our hearts. Punctuation acknowledges that the meaning of our discourse lies not in the units, but in the pauses. Actually, the complete meaning of the mind, the complete meaning of the ideas, they become clear only with the help of the punctuation marks. In short, the punctuation gives us the human voice and all the meanings that lie between the words. You aren't young, are you? That question mark is very, very important, because if you take away the question mark, the sentence loses its innocence. And look at that instruction. Don't do that. Don't do that is something very ordinary. But if you take away that apostrophe, it becomes a threat. Do not do that. Every believer. Well, if you put faith, for example, in inverted commas, it becomes something questionable. It is not faith. Faith, the so-called faith. So in this way, look at the last sentence. Pico Iyer uses imagery, personification, similes, and metaphors to express how he feels about punctuation. Through direct and indirect examples, he conveys to the audience the importance of such a tool, the importance of comma as well as punctuation. Now this is about the essay in praise of the humble comma, written by Pico Iyer. Thank you very much.